The Mongol Empire at its height was the largest contiguous empire in history, stretching from Korea in the east to Poland in the west, and from the Siberian tundra in the north to the Arabian Sea in the south. But by the beginning of the Victorian era, Mongolia had been reduced back to its original heartland and subjugated by the Qing dynasty of China. In the game Victoria 2, Mongolia is represented as a sparsely populated, uncivilized substate of the Chinese Empire. Being uncivilized means they can't industrialize or research new technologies, and being a substate of China means they're heavily restricted when it comes to foreign diplomacy, most notably lacking the ability to declare their own wars. From this position, it's very difficult to accomplish much of anything, let alone expand your territory. So anyway, I restored the Mongol Empire in Victoria 2. What I mean by that is, I started a completely unmodded game as Mongolia and conquered all the territory that the Mongol Empire held at its height in 1279, or at least the closest approximation allowed by the game. Specifically, I based it on this map taken from Wikipedia, which is hopefully mostly accurate. If you're familiar with this game and Mongolia's starting position within it, you might be wondering how on earth this was even possible. Well, that's what I will attempt to explain in this video. So just sit back and turn on your favorite Mongolian throat singing compilation as we embark on this cross-continental journey. The first and most obvious obstacle I need to overcome is the fact that I'm a substate of China. As mentioned earlier, this prevents me from starting my own wars, making expansion impossible. There are various ways that a subject nation may become independent, but in this case there are three relevant options. Have either China or my own country fall to an ideological rebellion, fight an independence war against China, or become westernized. The first option is very unlikely to happen, since even if a rebellion were to rise up, China would be quick to put it down with their armies. As for the second option, well, let's just say, good luck winning an independence war against China and all their other substates and allies. So that just leaves the third option. If a Chinese substate manages to become westernized before China itself, a special event will trigger which causes not only that substate, but all of China's substates to become independent. This is definitely a viable route to take, but the problem is that to become westernized, you need a lot of research points for passing reforms. And with Mongolia's poor starting literacy, it's going to take a very long time for those research points to trickle in. The only real way to speed things up is by utilizing the mechanic that lets uncivs gain research points on conquest. But that presents us with a bit of a catch-22. To become independent, we need to become westernized. But to become westernized, we need to conquer stuff. But to conquer stuff, we need to already be independent. So how can we resolve this seeming contradiction? The answer is by using a little exploit which I like to call Schrödinger's independence war. It states that a subject country is both independent and not independent until the independence war is over. Or to put it in more normal terms, you don't actually have to win an independence war in order to become independent, because technically you become independent the moment the war starts. Of course, if you don't manage to win the war in the end, then you will be forced back into subject when peace is signed. But in the meantime, you are free to do anything that a fully independent nation can do, including declaring other wars. This fact allows me to begin expanding even before I'm ready to become permanently independent. But there's no use in doing it right away, because uncivs can only gain research points from conquest if they have passed at least one military reform, and Mongolia has no reforms at the start of the game. As such, I need to wait about 5 years in the beginning to accumulate enough passive research points so that I may pass the first reform before ending my first wars. On top of that, I'll need a few years to encourage soldiers using my one national focus point to get my army to a decent size, and I'll also need to begin manually stockpiling wool and wine. These goods are required to recruit irregulars and cavalry, but due to my low nation rank, it's very difficult for me to consistently buy them off the world market. So if I don't stockpile them in advance, I won't be able to recruit armies quick enough by the time I need them. Once I'm sufficiently prepared, I can declare my first independence war and then proceed to justify war against Kokand, the only potential target for expansion that I can reach at the start. Kokand is initially too big to annex in a single war, due to owning territory across 5 different states, while uncivs can only be annexed if they have 4 states or fewer. But Russia will usually attack them and take one of those states within the first few years of the game, putting them below the annexation threshold and probably also destroying most of their armies. This lets me overrun their country without too many losses, and leaves me in good enough shape to do the same to Bukhara and Khiva afterwards. In the meantime, China and their allies had been busy overrunning my country, and should they reach 100% war score, they'd be able to force an unconditional surrender on me. This is a problem, because if China were to force me to become a subject again, then any other wars I'm in would end prematurely in a white peace. Fortunately, there's a way around that through a little trick which I like to call the leave on read exploit. In most other Paradox games, if you receive a diplomatic proposal and take too long to answer it, the game will pick a default option for you, usually to decline the proposal. In Victoria 2 this can also happen, but only if you never click on the message notification to open the proposal. Once you do that, however, you can keep it open for as long as you want and the game will never force you into a default reply. This includes peace offers, and in the case of peace offers, it has another fun side effect. Once an AI has sent you a peace offer, they can't send another one until you reply to the first, even if they reach 100% war score in the meantime. So as long as China sends me at least one peace offer prior to 100%ing me, I can just keep that offer open and prolong the war indefinitely, giving me time to finish my other wars. And in case you're worried that China will send their armies west and interfere in those other wars, then don't, because they won't. Different AI factions that are fighting you in different wars will very rarely enter each other's territories. Therefore, my armies are perfectly safe from China so long as I remain in Central Asia. The only issue is that I can't afford to remain fully occupied by China for too long. Being fully occupied doesn't directly impact your ability to wage war, but it does impact your income, and once you run out of money, you can no longer supply or reinforce your armies. This effectively limits how many other countries I can fight at a time, before I have to surrender to China and become their subject again. As you can see though, China wasn't content to simply subjugate me. They also took the opportunity to steal the state of Inner Mongolia from me, because they have course there. This isn't such a bad thing though, because losing control of your core provinces gives you Revanchism, which in turn increases the rate at which you gain Jingoism. Jingoism is needed when you want to add war goals during an ongoing war, something which will be very necessary throughout its run. So the Revanchism gained from losing Inner Mongolia actually makes the whole deal beneficial to me in the long run. For more information on Revanchism and Jingoism, see part 2 in my World Conquest explanation video. I'll probably link to that in the description or something. With that, I have completed the first cycle of the strategy that will be carrying me through the early game. By repeating this process a few times, I can eventually conquer most of Central Asia, thus growing my power and bringing me closer to Westernization. However, by the time I've completed the first war cycle, I'm already well above the infamy limit, and I will never be going below it again for the rest of the game. This gives every country in the world a containment CV on me, a war goal which forces you to disarm for the duration of the truce. But in practice, the vast majority of them will never actually use it. I'm not 100% sure what exactly goes into the AI's decision-making progress regarding this, but at least if you're playing outside of Europe, the only countries that are likely to try to contain you are those that share a direct border with you. Most of the countries that border me are relatively weak on civs that tend to be quite manageable, but there's also Russia, and once I annex Punjab, I'll also have a border to British India. Fortunately, it seems AI great powers aren't too concerned about containing uncivs, so I won't have to worry about them during this stage of the game. But there is one country that can and will contain me, and that is China. In every independence war after the first one, China will always add containment as part of the demands. This can't be avoided, but it's also not a big problem. The disarmament only lasts for the duration of the truce, and since I'll be forced back into a sub-state during that time, I'm safe from being attacked by anyone else. Once the truce is up, I can safely rebuild my armies before launching the next war cycle. After going through 3 cycles of war, I have annexed most of Central Asia and have accrued enough research points to westernize. However, I'll hold off on actually clicking the button for another 5 years. This is to let the disarmament from my latest war with China wear off before I become independent, or else I will be completely defenseless. In the meantime, I once again make sure to stockpile military goods, but this time I go for more advanced industrial goods like artillery and canned food, which will be needed to build infantry and artillery units once I westernize. Stockpiling these goods in advance is absolutely essential. If you haven't stockpiled them in advance, then you might not be able to immediately buy all the goods you need. But even if you can, you'll have to buy goods for 1 regiment at a time, which significantly slows down the recruitment process. But if you already have all the goods in your stockpile, you can immediately begin recruiting a bunch of units in parallel. This is important, since you can only begin recruiting these advanced units after westernizing, but when you westernize, you instantly become independent, leaving you vulnerable to anyone who might want to attack you. This includes China itself, who's pretty much guaranteed to declare war on you as soon as they can. If you can't get an army up and running ASAP, you'll risk being overrun. And here's where I need to admit that there is one important piece of information regarding westernizing as a Chinese substate that I've so far neglected to mention. When you press that button, it's not only you who will become westernized, but so will every other substate as well, and most deviously, so will China itself. So yeah, if you thought you could just speedrun westernizing as Mongolia and then have an easier time beating down an uncivilized China, think again. When I first discovered this mechanic, I thought it might single-handedly kill the whole challenge, because how on earth are you supposed to take on a fully westernized China when you have just joined the ranks of the civilized countries yourself? But luckily, things aren't quite as bad as they seem. While China gets to westernize for free this way, they don't get the same set of baseline techs that you usually get when you westernize. As a matter of fact, they don't get any techs at all, save for 3 out of 5 Tier 1 military techs. And the 2 military techs they don't get just happen to be the 2 most important. Bronze muzzle-loaded artillery, which enables the recruitment of artillery units, and the command principle, which gives you plus 25% military tactics, the single most powerful military modifier in the game. On top of that, China will not make any attempts at replacing their existing irregulars with more powerful infantry, even though said irregulars make up the bulk of their standing armies. However, there's still one significant advantage this civilized China has over its uncivilized counterpart: mobilization. This allows them to effectively double the size of their already massive standing army, so even with a tech advantage, you run the very real risk of getting overwhelmed by their sheer numbers. But if you manage to hold on long enough, you can gradually wear them down, to the point where you're free to begin occupying them mostly unopposed. And once you've destroyed China's standing army once, you'll have a difficult time fully rebuilding it, making every subsequent war against them considerably easier. However, neutralizing China is in fact not the biggest challenge you'll have to face after westernizing. Remember when I said that AI great powers aren't very keen on containing uncivilized countries? Well, about that. Yeah, so now that I'm westernized, I'm no longer safe from containment wars from the UK and Russia. Past the early game, these wars are by far the biggest threat to the run, and I very nearly failed on several occasions because of them. But I did find a few ways to deal with them. First is a trick I've decided to call an intervention trap. If a great power has a friendly opinion level in a country, they are eligible to intervene on behalf of that country should they be attacked. When a great power intervenes in this way, they automatically add a status quo war goal. This war goal has basically the same effect as a white peace when enforced, but once it has been added, no more war goals may be added by that side of the conflict. If I want to avoid being targeted by a containment war by, for example, Russia, I just need to make sure to attack someone they are friendly with, wait for them to intervene, and then accept the status quo. This gives me a truce with Russia for very little cost. I managed to pull this off a few times against both Russia and the UK, but sometimes they declared a war before I had time to prevent it. In those cases, I had essentially two options: fight back until they agreed to a white peace, or simply ignore them and try to focus on winning as many wars against my smaller neighbours as possible before I'm forced to surrender. The first time the UK attacked me, I went for the second option, since I was still too weak to do anything else. But that's obviously not ideal, since it forced me to disarm for 5 years thereafter. Later on though, when I got attacked by both Russia and the UK at the same time, I was just barely able to hold on until they gave up. But the best option would of course be to ensure that they don't declare the war at all. I eventually realized I could achieve that with the UK by simply releasing Punjab and Sindh as puppets, creating a buffer zone between myself and British India. This worked like a charm, and I never had to worry about the UK again from that point on. By that point, I was also strong enough to decisively defeat Russia one-on-one, which meant I was finally in position to begin conquering stuff from them for real. Only problem is that, by then, the majority of the game had already passed, and I still had a lot of Russian territory to get through. In order to successfully pull this off in time, there were 3 tricks that would prove essential. First is to use Jingoism to add multiple war goals in each war. As mentioned earlier, I'm gaining Jingoism at an accelerated rate thanks to the Revanchism from my course on Inner Mongolia, and also one province in Manchuria. The only thing that may interfere with this Jingoism gain is reform desire, since if my pops desire certain reforms, it will compete with their interest for Jingoism. This only becomes a serious problem if I get stuck with a government form that doesn't allow passing reforms, which actually happened to me at one point due to a communist rebellion. To deal with that, I had to let another rebel faction, specifically the Jacobins, enforce their own demands to turn me into a democracy, enabling me to pass reforms once more. The second trick is to trigger rebellions in Russia. If ideological rebels enforce their demands in a country, all truces that other countries have with them will disappear. By making sure there are always rebels ready to overthrow the Russian government following each war I have with them, I can repeatedly eliminate my truces with them and fight wars at a much higher frequency than normal. And for the third trick, there's the Liberation Conquest exploit. I've already explained this exploit in detail in my old World Conquest explanation video, and I'll leave a link to that in the description for those who are interested. But in short, by first releasing Poland-Lithuania from Austria-Hungary using the Free People war goal, then declaring war on Poland-Lithuania with the Conquest war goal, and then finally declaring war on Russia with the Liberate Country war goal to return all Polish-Lithuanian cores, I can annex all that territory in one go. By combining these 3 tricks, I'll be able to finish conquering everything I need from Russia before the game ends. One thing to note about this though. Looking at my reference map, you might argue I should be including the state of Ingria, which contains Russia's capital, St. Petersburg. The problem with that is that in Vanilla Vic 2, you can only take the capital state of a country if it's the only state they have left. As such, if I want to include Ingria, I would have to conquer literally the entire Russian Empire first. Not only would this make the challenge way more difficult to complete on time, but it would also make the final borders look very different from the former borders of the Mongol Empire. Because of this, I made the decision to exclude the state of Ingria, which on the whole makes the final result look far less wrong than the alternative. Aside from Russia, most of my other targets were either quite small or didn't have that much territory that I needed from them, so I could simply chip away at them little by little over the course of the game. The only ones that required any kind of special tricks were my final 2 targets, Manchuria and Romania. Manchuria was in control of all my core provinces, and so I had to save them for last in order to preserve my Revanchism. Meanwhile, Romania kept triggering crises to return their cores from Austria-Hungary, making it difficult to finish them off for good. By the time I was ready to fully conquer these 2, They each had 2 states left, thus requiring 2 consecutive wars. I didn't have time to wait out the truces in between, so I made use of a truce-breaking trick where you justify an extra war goal in advance and make sure not to add it during your first war with them. That way you still have it available for truce breaking, allowing you to start a second war immediately after. However, when I declared war on Manchuria, both the USA and Japan decided to intervene on their behalf, and were very stubborn about accepting peace. As a result, I couldn't finish that war before the game's end date. So in the end, I failed the whole challenge right on the finish line, all because of that damn great power intervention mechanic. But earlier in the run, I had already made the decision to abandon my usual self-imposed rule of no save scumming. So when this happened, I simply reloaded my last save from a few years back. This time I made sure to inflate my army by mass recruiting infantry and irregulars, in order to make me look intimidating enough that the USA and Japan would not dare stand against me. Just to be extra safe, I also declared a separate war in Japan before attacking Manchuria, thus guaranteeing they couldn't intervene even if they wanted to. Thanks to these precautions, I was able to successfully complete the challenge this time around, ending my final wars against Manchuria and Romania on the 12th of November 1935, less than 2 months before the end of the game. Well, that was quite the journey. Obviously, the final borders I settled on are somewhat arbitrary, given that the states in Vic 2 don't line up perfectly with the map I used as reference, and even that map probably takes a lot of liberties. Borders weren't as neatly defined back in 1279 as they are today, and I assume we don't have complete records to describe them either way. But my goal was to at least fill out the obvious parts, and otherwise just get as close as possible, and I definitely felt I accomplished that by the end. Anyway, that is all. I hope you've enjoyed this totally realistic alternative history simulation. If you want to see more of the actual gameplay from this run, then I have a series of videos on my second channel featuring edited footage from my stream. Or if you want to see literally every single detail of the roughly 32 hours long original unedited stream footage, then that can be found on my VOD channel. I will link to both playlists in the description. Thank you very much for watching, and have the greatest of times of day.